Hello, everyone, and welcome to the midweek program at the JC Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the education assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are in the Japanese garden because we have a program for you today. What makes our Japanese garden special? That's right, the Japanese garden at the JC Raulston Arboretum has a rich history, interesting design philosophies that line up with many Japanese gardens, but of course this is a very special place, and we will talk about that today. We've got our Director of Horticulture here, Paige, who will lead us through this program, and so it should be a good time. Those of you watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I will pass things over to Greg to tell us a little bit about what makes our Japanese gardens special.
Thank you. What we want to do today, what I want to do today, is wax and wane poetic a little bit about Japanese gardens. This is my favorite garden, and when we were kind of spitballing ideas of things to talk about, this came up, and I got really excited about it. And Blake and I both said, let's give each other homework. Let's do some research. And I went straight home. I did 1-800 Amazon, and I got a Japanese garden book. And I think I'm not embarrassed to say this on camera and to you, my friend. I did not do my homework.
Okay.
I did not read the book.
I did some homework, Greg. What I did was I found about 3 books about Japanese gardens, and then I read the introduction to all of them. And that kind of gives you just a broad overview of what makes a Japanese garden a Japanese garden.
You're so wise.
Yeah, you don't need to get too bogged down in the nitty-gritty of it, but just kind of give you just a general view of it.
I am a lover and a hoarder of books.
Yeah.
So just the fact that I have another book to add to my library that looks impressive when people come over to my house, that was good enough just to do that. But I want to talk a little bit about why we're talking about Japanese gardens, why they're special to me. And from there, we'll talk about our garden, why it's special to us, what's unique about it, some of the design aspects of it. We'll take some views of it because we are in it today, and it behooves us to kind of share this with you virtually and forever on the YouTube verse. It'll be preserved there so that you can come back and look at it and visit it. This is also selfishly a nice reprieve from, we've been doing the drag the hose thing today. So I've been dragging hoses since 6 o'clock this morning. I've been getting sprayed in the teeth with quick connect heads and leaky hoses. I'm on my second pair of socks today. So I'm very happy to be in the Japanese garden. So I've worked at a lot of gardens that have had some of that kind of influence, but none as special as this one. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. But where my love for Japanese gardens comes from, I could go all the way back to my very first woody plant class in college, where a lot of the plant material that we talked about had origins in Asia and in Japan. And that got my brain kind of going and looking at, all right, why is there such a focus in this? Being a young horticulturalist, I really didn't know why. And a lot of it is the history of plant collectors and people going to that part of the world to get plants and look for diversity, but also latitude and longitude wise, it lines up with us. So it makes sense to try some of those plants. And there's a lot of very interesting ones, and we are a plenty of that palette of plants here because it was very special to JC, and we'll talk about that also. So that was kind of my first introduction into Japanese gardens, Japanese plants, and kind of that whole realm of interest for me. Fast forward to working at some gardens. I was very lucky to get to go visit the Japanese garden at the National Arboretum. It's a very, very special place. There's a large Asian community in that part of the world, so a very strong interest in the Japanese garden, and also their bonsai collection is second to none in the United States. I'm going to give kudos to my friends and allies and colleagues at the North Carolina Arboretum in Asheville. They've got an amazing bonsai collection. But going to the National Arboretum and with friends there, going through the Japanese garden and seeing how those plants are used from a design perspective, the diversity of what they had, all those things were things that further piqued my interest into the Japanese gardens and gardening. The other thing is the love and passion for gardening in Japan is very deep. It's very cultural, all ages. It's very special there. there are a plethora of garden tools and implements that have influenced how I garden. And I'm going to share a couple because it's always good to share props. And I've shared these before. Pruning saws are something that I've used through my entire career, and nobody makes a better pruning saw than Silky. These are made in Japan. This folding one is a favorite of mine. You can get these online. I think A.M. Leonard, which we have talked about ad nauseum here, sells those. This is another one that's a little bit more for fine pruning. It's got a much finer blade on it. Give me your wallet. But these are good because they can clip to your pants or your belt loop. If you do a lot of pruning, this is the way to go. And we have talked about these pruners way too much, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up as well. Okatsunis, they make different sizes. These are small. I've got very small hands, but there's something cathartic about the locking mechanism when you're pruning and just clicking that on your leg. Just that sound reminds me of deadheading roses. You're spending a lot of time just pruning and clicking and putting those in your sheath. That triggers deadheading roses for me. But that's another kind of avenue, a gateway that got me very interested in Japanese gardens. And I'm going to talk about two books that I brought. And one of the ones, another story that relates to books. When I worked at the Scott Arboretum, I spent a lot of time in the library there and looking at books like this one on plants from Asia. This is the Jade Garden, New and Notable Plants from Asia. I became good friends with Douglas Justice, one of my comrades in arms at the University of British Columbia Botanical Garden. Fascinating book. Just a lot of good information in here that further whet my appetite on Asian and Japanese plants in particular. And the aforementioned book that I purchased to do my homework that I didn't quite get to, I did read the introductions, as you had said, and kind of went through and got caught up in some of the imagery here. But there are so many different books on the art and design and the different meanings of Japanese gardens. I encourage anybody who's interested in that to pursue that. So that's kind of the backbone on where my interests have come. I don't know if you want to spit a few out. If you don't, I can launch into what's behind us. I think it's worth mentioning because you just did a bonsai, but I have been very lucky, and this will be a segue to you. I've been very lucky to have traveled to Japan a couple different times, and all the pieces to the puzzle just kind of fell into place to get to visit nurseries, some of the shrines and the sacred areas of Japan. You know, driving down some road in Japan and seeing a sign and pulling over and seeing a katsura tree that's 200 feet tall and 1,000 years old. I mean, just that reverence for plants, it just exudes all through even the most concrete steel glass cities of Japan. There's plants and there's gardens and there's that interest. And I've been very lucky to do that. And I know that you spent some time in Japan. Yeah. We kind of have that in common, but real quickly, give us some spiel on that.
So I did 5 months of a bonsai apprenticeship in Kokubunji, which is right outside of Takamatsu, which is in the southern part of Japan. It's on Shikoku Island. And what you were saying about there are like signs that say this way to this like ancient tree. If you bring up Google Maps to try and figure out what you want to do today, look what's in the vicinity, there will be a dot on the Google map like, hey, this tree exists. You probably want to go to it for sure. And just like Takamatsu, just the area there, it's, well, if you literally translate Takamatsu, it means tall pine. And as a result of that, the whole area is just lots and lots of pine. It's a hot spot for bonsai cultivation. There are literally fields of trees that are at least 50 years old, pine trees that are, you know, a meter or smaller. And yeah, it's everywhere. People have bonsai trees just everywhere, just in their tiny little gardens, in their tiny little spaces. It's for sure. There's lots of esteem for the natural world.
The beauty of plants, the aesthetic of plants, plants to eat, plants to grow, to eat. All those things. You know, one of the nurseries I remember visiting, the owner told us how long that the nursery had been in his family. And when I got back in the car to visit the other nursery, I pulled up my phone and did some work on the Apple calculator. And I was like, this nursery has been in his family longer than this has been a country. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff too. And it just the reverence for plant material, it's hard not to get caught up in that. So naturally, when I started here, and I had been here many times, this was the first place I came when I got my job. I actually took my staff pictures in here because I was like, where do you want to get your picture taken? I was like, let's go to the Japanese garden. So the thing that I love the most about this, and please join in with some of the history because so much of that hasn't stuck with me yet.
Sure.
Part of JC's vision with increasing the diversity of plants in the American nursery industry was to increase the diversity, and by that going to Japan and other places to bring some plants in to add to the kind of the static amount of plants that you could get in the United States. So he was very instrumental in doing that from the start of the Arboretum in the 70s. And some of those nurseries that I visited when I was in Japan, almost every single one of them had a picture of JC in it, or a hat that JC gave somebody 20 years ago when he visited, or 30 years ago, whatever. So there's that connection and that reverence for plants. And when you park your car and come into the garden, it's all around you. One of the things that JC wanted you to experience was any place in the garden that you stop, you should be able to see a Japanese maple, and they're everywhere throughout the garden because there's ones for every size, every flavor, every color, every texture. So that influence is all through every acre of the garden, not just here focus-wise.
Absolutely. JC, he fought in the Vietnam, well, he didn't fight, he was doing research in the Vietnam War. And while he was over in Vietnam, he also got an opportunity to visit Japan. And that's sort of where he fell in love with Japanese gardening, Japanese aesthetic. And I love hearing that people still have like pictures of him and stuff.
Every nursery I went to over there,
yeah,
he had been there before and they took pictures with him.
Yeah.
And somebody that we visited, the gentleman whose nursery was multi-generational, pulled out a hat that JC gave him.
For sure.
And he quickly took my hat off of my head and kept it. Although it wasn't a hat to give, he was like, can I have that? I was like, no, it's mine. And he took it. But yeah, that reverence is wrought through and so amazing to be a part of today.
I think part of what makes our Japanese gardens special is the way that JC took his love of Japanese gardening and made it very much his own kind of style. Like we are all about trialing plants. Yeah. We are all about introducing new plants. So one of the main tenets of Japanese gardens are generally, they're a fixture of Zen Buddhism. Like the Japanese garden is not an ornamental garden. It is a functional garden. It is a tool you use for meditation. It is an actual tool. You need to be gardening in a Japanese garden for it to actually be a Japanese garden. Yeah. And so like one of the main things you'll find in a lot of Japanese gardens is just a lot of, it's really understated. There's a lot of evergreen species. There's nothing really to like, wow, get your attention. Nothing's gonna knock your socks off. It's really just sort of calming. It's to bring you towards center, just keep everything, to get you away from the hustle and bustle of city life. So you can actually read through some of JC Raulston's through the old newsletters of the Arboretum here. You can read about when this Japanese garden was first built and the first plants that JC wanted to plant in here. He ordered about 25 different cultivars of Satsuki azaleas, which are absolutely wonderful.
They're my favorites.
They're beautiful, absolutely wonderful. But that just screams like what JC what he wanted. He wanted to try out all these new varieties of Satsuki because there's beautiful flowering plants that are sure to capture your attention. It's not necessarily about being understated and about meditation. It's about trialing plants and getting excited about plants and celebrating the history and the diversity and the reverence for nature that permeates every aspect of it.
Yeah, and it's, like I said, it's all through the garden, not just in here. So, and you brought up a point that I wanted to mention. Every garden that I've been to in the United States that has a Japanese garden, Chicago Botanic has an amazing one. Portland has one of the best ones this side of Japan. I love both of those gardens, but they take on kind of a feel for the part of the country that they're in. So the Portland Japanese garden very much has a Pacific Northwest feel. You know, you're immersed in the weather because it sits up above Portland. You're immersed in big, tall native spruce trees and pine trees and local trees that are local to the Pacific Northwest. But it's very much a Japanese-inspired garden. It fills you with that sense of calm when you walk through. They've used the hardscapes, all those things, you know, the bamboo, the water features, the raked gravel, but it very much has a Pacific Northwest feel. Chicago, to me, has kind of that Midwestern feel about the way that it's done, and the stories behind theirs is fascinating. It's basically, it was built on top of a swamp, and our garden very much has that feel. You know, it's very signature to this part of the United States. You know, crested in the background are the loblolly pines. You know, there's bigger maples, there's southern magnolias that are kind of on the edges as well, helping kind of confine the space and giving it that feel as well. So it very much takes on kind of the feel and aesthetic of gardens in the Southeast and in North Carolina in particular. And today, when it's a million degrees and hot and humid, that permeates your senses as well. But the thing I like most about this garden is that kind of sense of isolation that it gives you, not just with the walls, but with the plant material that's around it, so that you kind of feel enclosed and a part of the garden. You can come in here and all that stuff just kind of slips away. Yes, the train just went by, but that's kind of a temporary thing. You know, you can come in here and sit on a bench, and in 10 seconds, if your blood pressure isn't down and your mind slows down and your heart rate slows down, you might need to go see a doctor. There might be something more wrong with you than a garden can fix. But this garden definitely does that and more, I think.
And the nursery I did my apprenticeship at in Kokabunji was like right by the train station. So
of course,
to me, there's nothing more Japanese than hearing the train go by every 3 minutes, really, because they have amazing public transportation.
Every 3 minutes.
And I loved what you were saying about how the space talks to its environs, sort of generally. Mm-hmm. One of the books that I read was, I believe it was called Spatial Illusion by Teiji Ito. And he talked about this concept in Japanese gardening where it's borrowed scenery. I'm not sure what the Japanese word for it is, but borrowed scenery. And the idea is that, like, the garden doesn't have to end at the borders of your garden. You can do interesting little techniques to sort of capture the scene that goes beyond it. One example that they gave that really made this stick in my head was, so there was a garden that looked out on a hill. And you see the hill and you would love to like incorporate that hill into your garden somehow. And so the way they did it was they took a stone lantern and they put the 2 stone lanterns that look identical. They take 1 stone lantern, put it in their backyard, kind of right there in the garden proper, as it were. And then they took another stone lantern and put it out on that hill. And then when you're looking at it, it's just like, oh, there's this lantern and then there's that lantern. So surely these are related. And then all of a sudden that hill is a part of your garden. Yeah. And that's like taking the natural setting and capturing it, emphasizing it within the context of the setting that you're trying to create. That is very much a Japanese principle for Japanese gardens. So you're going to find that permeating into all the Japanese gardens you visit. And
that's a good segue to talk about some of those borrowed things and some of the signature things that are in here that are kind of in keeping with that. You know, the first and the most obvious are the walls of the garden, and we are very lucky to have an amazing crew of volunteers here who helps with some of the heavier lifting, construction, and maintenance things. And we just did our to-do list last week. And one of those things on the to-do list is to pretty up the walls in here. Again, I'm being passive aggressive and wanting to clean up my favorite garden, but that's something that we're going to do is touch up with, just clean them up and touch up with paint. So very much in keeping, the little peaked roof and the little note of the bamboo on top speaks to that style of gardening. When you first enter the garden, you have to take a little jog to the right so that your eye is kind of tricked and surprised when you're around the corner and you get to see this really pretty vista that we have here. That's another one of those very kind of Japanese garden-esque things. And as you look down through the garden, the gravel that's in here, and I think some of that plays homage to dry stream beds. The other of it is the tie to Buddhism, where we've got a group of volunteers that are very near and dear to me, and I always come in here to see them because I like to see what they do. They rake the gravel, they clean the leaves up, they weed, they do some pruning, they get it kind of zhuzhed up and made up for the week, and then they come next week and do it all over again. So they've got the special rakes that they do the different patterns in, and that's very much that homage. Some of the big stones that we have in here, I don't know if these came from Japan or not.
I don't know. That would not, I would hope that they came from here, like the native
local
site. And yeah.
I've been to gardens in the States where all that hardscape stuff does come from Japan, but I like and I like the embrace that doing that stuff regionally, and that's what they've done at the North Carolina Arboretum with their bonsai and some of their Asian-inspired things. But those are to kind of mimic some mountain peaks and things like that, to pay homage to that and let your mind kind of wander and think about that sort of stuff. And they're placed kind of interspersed throughout. Back in the corner, we've got an area where there's a little more rock. And again, it's meant to kind of mimic a dry stream bed. And we've used that to plant it with big sweeps of things. Again, nothing that's going to really detract and take your eye. There's not going to be some gaudy variegated plant there that's going to outcompete all of its friends, allies, and neighbors. There's sweeps of mondo grass and other perennials. We don't do a lot of changing out of plant material in here, but we did add 3 cycads that were gifted to us.
I love that you added 3 cycads.
That was all Tim being very creative and thinking about that. And as soon as we got these, he's like, I've got a spot for these. Yeah. And there they ended up, and they look great there.
It's a little cold here for cycads just out in the open. So that we have that nice little corner so that they're tucked in there so that we can actually have cycads. In the area of Japan that I was in, they are everywhere.
Yes.
They are all over the place. That is a quintessentially Japanese plant.
And that's what he was thinking. This is a great plant for this garden. Yeah. And it's because of the walls, because of the isolation and insulation of the plant material that surrounds, they're more likely to be able to handle being in here year round.
And that emphasizes, right. But like our whole thing with JC trialing plants, like, is kind of fusing together Japanese gardens with our mission of trialing and learning about plants. It's like, you can have cycads, here's how to do it. Like, we are all about pushing boundaries and figuring out how to make sure we have as many plants as possible.
And using that as kind of a teaching mechanism. I'm always thinking about that when we're taking things out and adding new things, is how can we turn it into something that's going to be a learning opportunity as well as trialing something different. So all those things, the choices of plants in here, we've got traditional Japanese maples, dwarf ones, mounding ones, also thinking and looking down the road proactively at what's going to look good in the fall. That's an important aspect of Japan, and I've not been to Japan in the fall. That's high on my list of things to get to do, but
it's awesome.
That's something I can't even imagine.
Yeah, no.
That's something that has been thought about with this is, all right, what's the fall palette going to look like? And then also, what's the winter palette going to look like? And with some of these weeping plants, you're going to get that nice texture. With the evergreen ground covers and the evergreen conifers, you're going to have that interest. All those things were thought of in the palette of plants that we chose. We've got a small patch of black bamboo that is very aggressively wanting to explode and expand its realm outside of the garden. And we spend a lot of energy and blood, sweat, and tears trying to keep it in bounds. It's gotten out of its prescribed self-contained structure.
Yeah, it
and
has.
it's popping up in other places, but we're doing our best to keep it at bay.
For sure.
There's a nice Japanese lantern that's carved out of stone that's in here that pays homage to that. 2 low stone benches that bring your mind to that. The stone walkway that goes through, and if I can remember it correctly, I think their corners are supposed to touch in different places or something to that effect.
Well, the path needs to be zigzag because the idea is it's to deter evil spirits, because we all know this, that evil spirits are incapable of turning.
Yes.
They can only go in straight lines.
Right.
So naturally, you build bridges and sidewalks so that they zigzag. That way the spirits can't get in, y'all. It's easy as that.
So if you're getting chased, this is the garden you want to come to.
This is the garden.
It's gonna throw them off completely. There's also a zigzaggy bridge, which is very quintessential to Japanese gardens. The thing I like about ours is it isn't straight, so it makes your eye think the garden is much longer than it is, and you want to see where it's going to go. Something you said earlier, Blake, about borrowed landscapes.
Yeah.
We've got a big moon window down to the end where you can see through to the edge of the garden.
Absolutely.
But again, that draws your eye out and makes you think that the garden is bigger or more isolated, kind of depending on your perspective.
For sure. That book that I read, it was called Space and Illusion, because that's sort of the key to Japanese gardens, is playing with the space that you have, creating illusions to make it look bigger than it is, bringing in parts of the world outside your garden into your garden. And
and it's also a good vantage point when you come in from the exit or the entrance, depending on how you come into the garden. You don't get a full vision of it until you come to that. And it's an opportunity to stop and look through, to kind of whet your appetite to come on in and enter the garden and see what actually is here. But, and bending back towards trialing things, there's a lot of plants in here that were put in here specifically for that reason. There's an alyssum right here that I know this might be one we introduced, and the name completely escapes me right now. That was placed in here because of that. Some of the akuba that we have in here were placed in here because of that. There's a couple of big magnolias that we knew may or may not be hardy, and were put in here to take advantage of the protection of being here. But they've become really important kind of anchors and frameworks of the garden itself. The conifer behind Blake is a Chamaecyparis obtusa, very often used in Japanese gardens. It is sort of kind of pruned in Hindu pan, which is called cloud pruning. I've seen really tight extremes to that. The Chicago Botanic Garden is a good example of that. They do a great job of doing that. I can't imagine how much time and energy it takes to do that. It seems like they have hundreds, and just the one that we have, it looks like something that would be on the top of some Japanese mountaintop, or a mountaintop here in North Carolina. All those ideas come in my head when I come through here.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to bring up is sort of the Japanese idea, which it comes from Shintoism, if I'm not mistaken, but it's the idea that every physical object has a spirit. So like you want to know why you spend literally days pruning a single individual tree? Because that tree has a spirit. It is basically an individual. The same goes for the rock. Why do we have the rock set up in that way? Because its head is clearly going up. You don't want the rock laying down. You want the rock to be comfortable. The rock has a little friend next to it. That's obvious. That might be the rock's pet, I don't speak to rocks directly, but I can make some guesses, and these are just like things to consider. Like you're developing an empathy for nature and a mindfulness of it, and really thinking about every single individual piece and how every single individual piece relates to every other piece. That's it, man. Just the connection of everything, the interrelationships of it. Japanese gardens aren't about oh gosh, and we're going to get into all sorts of contradictions here.
It's good.
It's not about the actual thing. It's not about the thing itself, but it's the relationship between the thing and everything around it. And like the thing itself is still super important. It still has its spirit. You still want to make it be the best version of itself that it is. But like once it's there, what does that mean to everything else around it? And sort of drawing these connections between all the various elements within the garden, showing how they're all connected to each other, how they're all connected to everything outside of it, how they're all connected to us individually. We're a part of this too. Once we're in the garden, we also have our spirit that is connected to the spirits of everything else. And just playing with all of that, analyzing the relationships between it, meditating upon those relationships. That's where it comes back to the Zen Buddhism. That's how it becomes a tool for meditation.
And the folks that take care of this garden, to me, they're a big part of this too.
Yes.
Because I can see their signatures when I come in here, and I talk to them and have since I've been here. And I recognize those little things now when I come in here, and that's very much a part.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go in another kind of tangent, kind of hinging on what you said. I consider myself very lucky to know about plants, know about gardens. I've always spent a lot of time outdoors. We share the love for running. And for me, running in the mountains was very special to me. I did that for a number of years, but to me, that was very meditative and really pulled me into my surroundings. And this translates to that kind of in the same spirit, so to speak. When you've been running for a really long time and you get loopy, things do become spirits. But even not that, those places have become very sacred to me. And it's the same with gardens. If you think about some of the gardens in Japan, or in some of the cities in Japan, you want to realize how big a city like Tokyo is, get stuck in traffic in it for 3 years or 3 hours. And it's just an immense city. And it's easy to get out of the city via train, but having small spaces like this are very crucial, to where you can get that sense of being connected to nature and just that calm of being around plants and the spirit of the plants and the stone and the gravel and the benches and all the hardscape stuff. It has to be experienced, and you have to kind of be open to that when you come into this garden. That's the take home.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And that seems like a good place to get into some questions.
Awesome.
There weren't too many questions, but we got a handful of them. Okay. So Wayne said that he believed that Tim several years ago did a demonstration on pruning the Chamaecyparis as cloud pruning. He wants to know if it's still being maintained.
I think it is. I think it's of the age where it doesn't need as much of that done to itself, and it's kind of a different variation. It's not as intense, and I think because of its friends, neighbors, and allies, it's getting shaded, so it's not growing as quickly. And I think it's reached that point in its life where it's just kind of slowed down a little bit, so it doesn't need a lot. To me, the best vantage point to really experience that is right here, looking through it, because you can see all those different layers. You don't get as good of a perspective of that on the Lath house side. Yeah. But I think it's done minimally. I don't think anything's been done to the upper canopy. It looks like it's a little more, but that's something that, looking at things that we want to do from a maintenance standpoint in here. Definitely. From an evaluation standpoint, there might be some things that Mark and I will come through here and say, you know what, let's take these Akuba out and put something else in here, just to see how that plant's going to perform. We might want to do something more aggressive with this, and get somebody that could climb the tree and really aggressively do some cloud pruning. One of the things that's really important to me is with the crepe myrtle bark scale is to ensure that this beauty stays happy and healthy, and it's due for our good friends at Leaf and Limb went through and did some pruning a couple years ago, and it's due for that kind of pruning again. We've got a dead branch in it, and some of the suckers that are in, some of them need to be thinned out. But just ensuring that this is going to be here, as a caretaker of this garden, making sure that this doesn't get affected by the insect, that we're doing all the right cultural things of pruning, continuing to mulch the garden, probably tardy and doing some soil samples to see what's going on in the soil. All those are some of the things that we're looking at doing in here. You know, maintenance things like cleaning up the walls, cleaning up the boardwalk here. We decided that we might want to make the slats a little bit bigger so that all the spent flowers don't congregate in the cracks. They actually fall through. So those are some things that we're looking at to kind of, what do we need to do to take care? We want to keep that individuality, but we want to do the right cultural things for that mature canopy that surrounds and to make sure that it stays and looks good and is happy and healthy.
Definitely. And if you want to see a good example of a cloud pruned tree at the JC Raulston Arboretum, our Pinus densiflora vibrant over on the south end of the Great Lawn, just the character of its natural growth habit. It's just real tight and it just shades out chunks. And then our wonderful volunteers, the border babes, will come in and cut out just the dead.
Amelia today was pruning that tree.
Oh yeah.
And they're very good about taking the dead needles out of it, which is important to keep it healthy too.
Yeah.
That's a good one. It's beautiful.
It is. It's a very good one. Next question. Beth wants to know, what day is the garden raked?
I want to say, since you put me on the spot, I'm going to get the day wrong. I think they do it Tuesdays.
I think they do it Tuesday. That's usually when I see Vanette out here.
Yeah, she pulls in and if she sees me, she'll holler and throw an arm up, and she gathers her tools and her peeps and she comes out and she works her magic.
For sure. Okay, and then Kathy asked for a link or the years that JC wrote about Japanese gardens. I will surely put a link to our newsletters in the, I'll send it to you here now, Kathy, and then I'll put it in the link to the description. I'm not sure what—
Is that our Kathy?
Kathy Rauch.
Okay.
One of our Kathys. We have quite a few Kathys here, but that's okay. We love them all. And I'm not sure which years in specific he was talking about them. I'd say early in the 80s, early at the beginning when they were building. I think it was like 83 or 84 was when this was first built.
That sounds about right.
That sounds about right. But that appears to be all of the questions for today. So thank you so much, Greg, for pulling together. Quick. It really did, honestly, for sure. We've got about, it's 3:41 now, so that was no kidding.
How about that?
How about that? But thank you for pulling together this presentation.
Thank you for your assistance as always.
Absolutely, happy to help out. And thank you everybody for joining us on the midweek program today. We will be back next week with a garden conversation. Our curator, Dennis Carey, will be sitting down with Phil Brindle from the Triangle Orchid Society talking about orchids. So if you are interested in orchids, I hope you will join us for that conversation next week. We will see you all then. Y'all take care.